What's up? This is Bart Hanson for CrushLivePoker.com, and we're going to take a look at a hand that was recently played on the latest season of High Stakes Poker. High Stakes Poker, of course, has come back, and it's great to see AJ Benza and Gabe Kapling doing the commentary. Quite a big game over the course of several days. So they were playing 400, 800 with an $800 big blind ante, so a huge game. And we see a legend of high stakes poker here, Tom Dwan, bringing in for a raise from early position with ace-10 of spades to 2,500. Gets over to Brynn Kenney, who's on the button and has 9-7 of hearts, and he flat calls the button. Now, gap-suited connectors can certainly be troublesome, and a lot of times if you call sort of in the middle of the field with people behind you, you can get squeezed. Someone overcalls behind you. It's a really difficult spot to play, but on the button, obviously, you can loosen up your calling range. So 9-7 suited probably towards the bottom end of what I would call with there, but they are fairly deep, so he makes the call. Gets folded back over here to Steven in the big blind with ace-3 of hearts. This is a hand that you might sometimes 3-bet squeeze to try to pick up some of the dead money because there's no overlay, but usually the standard play here is to just call, and that's exactly what he does, and we see a flop. So the flop comes out Jack 5 deuce with a couple of hearts, so Steven flops the nut flush draw and a wheel draw, so a combo draw. Brynn Kenney here with 9-7 of hearts has a 9 high flush draw. And Tom Dwan has pretty much missed. I mean, he does have a couple of backdoors here with ace-10 of spades. It's going to get checked over to him. He's going to start a continuation bet, which I don't have a big problem with. I mean, if he gets called, he can fire on a lot of high blank cards, which is going to give him additional equity. He can fire on some backdoor spades. So against two people, you might bet here sometimes on this disconnected board. Probably more than two people. You want to check and shut it down. So he makes a continuation bet here, and Brynn Kenney just calls. And I like that play. Usually you want to raise with some of your combo type flush draws here. If he calls, that looks strong. A lot of times Steven is just going to get out of the way, and if Dwan has missed, Dwan will just check to him on a blank turn, and Kenney can just bet the turn. So he makes the call, and now we get over here to Steven's hand, which is the nut flush draw with a straight draw here to a 4. So in general, you do want to be raising some of your combo draws here. Ace-3 sometimes has a sliver of showdown value heads up, but usually not going to be against two people. So this is probably one of the good draws to raise. And he does raise. He makes it 17,000. So Dwan bets 4,000 call. He makes 17,000. Obviously, Dwan's going to get out of the way, and now gets back over here to Brynn Kenney, and he has a pretty easy call. One of the things that I would be thinking about, though, of course, is the possibility that Steven actually might have a higher flush draw than me. I mean, the hands that Steven would probably do this with would be sets, which there's really only 6 combos of. If you think he's going to 3-bet pocket jacks, which he probably would against a raise and a call, doesn't really have many 2-pair here, although he was getting a good price. So maybe Jack 5 suited, 5 deuce suited, Jack deuce suited, sometimes squeaks in there. But, usually you're going to be looking at some of those 2 pairs and some sets and some higher flush draws. Not really going to see like a Jack necessarily check raise here against 2 people. So Brynn, with only having to call about $13,000 more, does make the call, and now we roll the turn. So with the turn being just a hair under $47,000, the Queen of Hearts rolls off, and now both players make a flush. This is obviously a great card here for Steven. Brynn thinks his hand is probably good now as well, but if you're going to check raise with a nut flush draw and you hit, usually you're going to come out and bet here again. Occasionally you can get a little bit tricky and check, but at this stacked up, you don't really want it to have it go check. So he comes out and he fires 27,000, and I think that that's perfectly okay. Now, again, for Brynn Kenney, you're on the button here with a 9 high flush. We talked about the types of hands that we thought Steven might be check raising the flop with, sets, maybe some 2 pairs and higher flush draws. Usually, a lot of those non-flush hands are going to check the turn now on this Queen of Hearts turn, because if we're Brynn Kenney, we've bet and called the check raise. Calling really is our only option. If we start to raise, we really do start to overplay our hand a little bit. And in reality, if we see a blank river and we face a huge bet, we actually going to have a fairly tough decision. This is going to be played as a call across the turn, and we'll see what happens as we take it to the river. So with just over $100,000 in the pot, the river comes off a queen, so it pairs the board here. And obviously there's a few full houses that can be out there. Now, from Steven's perspective, we have to think about what Brynn Kenney might actually have when he calls the flop and calls a check raise. So he could have hands like sets. He could have a hand like Queen Jack. Remember, he's called our check raise and called a fairly big bet here on the turn. If he just had a hand like King Jack or Ace Jack, something like that, no heart, he's probably not going to continue on the turn. And also, too, if he does have a Jack, say, with a high heart in it, like maybe the King of Hearts, he's not going to really call a river bet here either. So he has some smaller flushes here. And he also has some boats in the form of, say, pocket fives, pocket deuces, or Queen Jack. Steven decides to check here. I do like an approach of actually betting here for value with the nut flush. I actually think there are more combinations of flushes that very well might call us versus, say, full houses. I sometimes will take this spot and bet, and then if raised, really, make a decision. But he decides to check, and what's really interesting about this hand is Brynn Kenney actually now has a decision the other way. I mean, the pot is $100,700 here, but when you take a look at this action, it really gets to a very, very interesting point, because if Steven has a higher flush, Kenney loses. If Steven has a full house, Kenney loses. Now, you wouldn't think that a guy would necessarily check the nut flush draw here at the end, but if he had like a hand like Jack 5 or Jack Deuce, those hands are actually counterfeit now if he did bet the turn with them, and he is most likely just going to check fold. He doesn't beat a queen, he doesn't even beat Ace Jack, and he certainly doesn't beat a flush. So it's really an interesting spot here for Brynn Kenney. He decides to bet fairly small, and he bets 39,000, and he actually value owns himself, and Steven calls with the best hand. And when I mention value own, and what I'm talking about is he actually value bets the worst hand and gets called by a better hand. It was very surprising to me that Steven checked the river here, but I think the more interesting part of this hand is the fact that Brynn Kenney should seriously consider checking behind here given this action. If you like what you've seen here, please hit the subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this call-in hand, hit the like button down below. To check out crushlivepoker.com, click on the link in the description. Use the code YTA300 to get the first 30 days for free.